Alrighty.
All right, so welcome back, everybody, to the Interdisciplinary History Podcast. Victoria and I today are joined by Terri Suntjen. Would you care to introduce yourself, Terri? We always kind of feel like people are better at explaining themselves than we can.
My English name is Terri. I'm from Salt Lake Cree Nation in Treaty 6 territory. I am currently the Director of Indigenous Initiatives with the Crees University, and I am also a student with the University of Calgary, pursuing in the fall a PhD in social work. And my work, my passion and my work that I've been doing has been based in Indigenous social work and Indigenous healing practices, as well as a passion, of course, working in education.
That's amazing.
That is so cool. It's absolutely amazing.
I'm sure it's kind of maybe a question that you've been having to answer a lot lately, but how has your approach to your studies kind of changed over the last year? Like, are you struggling to engage with those practices because of the distancing that we've been asked to do?
Absolutely. I think that, I feel like I've been a student forever. And so I know that going into COVID and moving to online, I was already partially doing some online courses, but I still had a connection. And so for the last year of my program in my MSW, it was in COVID, and it sucked. It really did, in the sense that there was a huge disconnection from not being and having that face-to-face kind of connection with your peers and your instructors. But it's been, I'm glad I'm done, that piece, and moving into the fall, I hope that, we do have some type of hybrid model of some sort where we can safely come together and have classes or some kind of interaction at least. I was also going to mention, one of the things that we started doing with one of the assistant professors in the faculty, the School of Social Work with the QN, Amber Dion. Amber and I are longtime friends, but we started a podcast as well, Two Crees in a Pod, last June in the midst of COVID, and part of that was to ensure that we were creating a digital resource to reach students more specifically, but also within our communities and the public. And so we didn't initially think it would go as long as it has. We record weekly as well, so we have weekly guests that come in via Zoom, obviously, or on the phone. And we are doing weekly sessions. And that's been kind of my saving grace, I have to say, in terms of assisting me in my education, but in my work as well. We have the honor of sitting with amazing scholars, Indigenous scholars, Indigenous trailblazers out there, community folks, people who are doing, amazing work on the ground. And just being able to be in the presence of their stories and their teachings. And that has been, I think, one of the things that has really pulled me through COVID was that particular project and being able to do that with a good friend of mine.
We found your podcast actually through the Royal Alberta Museum Indigenous Resources section. I was really excited to see that because I love listening to podcasts, and I've listened to a couple of episodes of your show so far, and I really like it. It's amazing. Do you have a favorite episode that you enjoyed recording, or if there's a person you enjoyed talking to?
That's a really tough question, and it's a tough question because I think, and me and Amber talk about this, when we walk away from interviews, we're just like wow, that was amazing. And I think that, the energy that the folks bring when they meet with us, it's beautiful. And so it's tough. I think that our first episode with Dr. Leona Makokis, who is a mentor for both Amber and I, was definitely, we started that ceremony. That podcast actually started, that first one was recorded in person, just the three of us on site at Blue Quills University, but we had a ceremony right before, the three of us. And I think that's, and maybe because it was our first, and maybe because it was done within ceremony, but just starting at that space was just, it was amazing. And it was scary because we had never done a podcast before. we are not podcasters, so to speak. Like, we didn't know what the heck we were doing. And so we just had to roll with it. And we were recording, and we still record from my phone, right? We tried to use some high tech stuff, and we're like, no, we're not going to go there. But definitely, I think the first one was one that I definitely remember. But all of them have been amazing in different aspects, for sure.
That's amazing. Yeah, that just sounds incredible.
We saw through Campus Life on the MacEwan website another episode that you and Amber Dion had done exploring the power of meditation in decolonizing trauma. I believe you did that in March. Can you talk a little bit about how that came to be? Because that's a very interesting, that's very interesting to me, because I think that's really taking into account the way historical experiences affect people on a very real and psychological level. Mm-hmm. As kind of an intersection between medicine and historical understanding.
Yeah, sorry, what session? Did you say a podcast or a session that we were doing? There's a lot of things that me and Amber do together, so I'm trying to
Yeah, absolutely. I believe it was a presentation that you and her covered with Dr. Michael Yellowbird.
Oh, okay. Yes, that was actually, we moderated that event. So we invited Dr. Michael Yellowbird he was actually the one that did the presentation on the topic. And Amber and I did moderate that event. So that wasn't specifically our presentation. Yeah, that was Dr. And so we do that often with Kihil Weston, and maybe it's a good time to kind of talk about what we do at the center. And one of the things is that we oftentimes, when I started at MacEwan, which was about 4 years ago, typically the center was specific to just only supporting students. And I think that is the goal, and it still is the top priority of the center. But what we've seen was that we also understood that there's also staff and faculty that need to be supported, that also needed to also be educated in terms of Indigenous education, Indigenous culture, Indigenous ways of knowing, being, and doing, and across the board and across campus. And so one of the things was that we ensured that when we did our planning that year, that we were opening it up to the public, so engaging in the public. We were also opening this up and engaging with faculty and staff as well as students, on top of the students. And there was a purpose for this, again, to bring together a community, to start building on a community as well of support for students. But also when we think about, a lot of the work that is being done within institutions around the TRC and the calls to action, we think about some of the work that needs to be done, and oftentimes one of the really important things I think is that how are we supporting faculty or educating faculty as well, because those are the ones that are going to be teaching in the classrooms with students. So how are we also ensuring that they are creating safe places, and safe meaning being free of racial discrimination and impacts of harm that may, or even just very inappropriate assignments, right? And so there's and people begin to understand that when they begin to understand Indigenous history, when they begin to understand who we are as Indigenous people, and not just through our pain and through our the historical impacts of colonization and assimilation and genocide. Who are we? And so, inviting people into the space has been, and obviously we've been doing it virtually for the past year, but we have a brand new center, and our hope is that when we come back to, face to face, that we have, again, this community of people coming into the space and utilizing the space for many different things. We have a very big space that has a wellness space, where we have the nurturing swing that Dr. Darlene Auger trained some of our team members with to use with with the McEwen community specifically, not the public. And then we also have a large gathering room, which we hold ceremony in, which is a classroom, which we've had events in. Sometimes it's just a study room for students. So there's a lot of different spaces in the new space that really bring together a sense of community. Because I think oftentimes our students are also coming from their communities away from they're leaving their families and their homes and their friends. And so it's really important for us to make sure that we are making a connection in some way and providing the best support that we can. So we have a number of sessions that are done virtually so we typically send out emails through Roslyn as our administrative assistant, and she sends out emails, so you can just directly email her to be added to that list of just what's going on. We also share through our social media sites. There's a Facebook and an IG site, and again, it's open. All of our sessions have always been open to anyone, and we welcome the participation. So, yeah.
That is incredible.
That's amazing. So it sounds like one of the things we wanted to ask you was how have your processes sort of changed? And I almost wonder if being able to hold sessions digitally, there isn't some convenience through COVID that perhaps you're able to reach a wider audience, or you're pushed to do things that coincidentally reach a wider audience?
Yeah, we definitely do reach a wider audience because we are doing things virtually. We hosted the first Indigenous Youth Rising Conference in March, and it was done virtually. So it was the first time that we've ever done a conference, let alone a virtual conference. And we reached over 3,000 participants who participated in the conference. And so that was such a huge success for us, because again, it speaks to the connections that we were able to meet that we weren't necessarily would have been if it would have been face to face. The other piece to this is that we offered it free, and so the accessibility. I think that's so important when we think about the work that we are doing, and that we are ensuring that our resources and our supports are accessible. And so we did this Indigenous Youth Conference. It was a free conference, and it was successful. And again, they got to meet professors on there. They got to have a virtual tour of the center. They got to meet our advisors, and then they met our elders. And then they had these amazing young Indigenous people who are doing amazing work across Canada. And TikTokers were such a thing. TikTok is totally blown up during COVID. So we had to get some Indigenous TikTokers on there, and that was a big success as well. But I think as things change and as we move through COVID, I think that there is a lot of changes, and there is this new normal. As a supervisor, it's really important for me that I'm taking care of my team and ensuring that they're well. And sometimes it's difficult. It's been really difficult. I had to do new hires during COVID, and that's really tough to do a new hire when you have, you're not in person and you can't connect, but only virtually. And so you're not in the space to go through things, or even working in a practicum or having a practicum student, right? There's definitely been some big challenges. I think it teaches us a lot of things, the importance of connections, the importance of our relationships, the importance of what sometimes maybe some of us have taken for granted. And so I know that, for me in my own personal life, not being able to just go home to my parents all the time, or being, having large family gatherings, definitely that's missed. And so I think that we have to make sure that during this time we are all taking care of each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely agree. So speaking of sort of that connection and sort of that community, you were involved with the renaming of the wards here in Edmonton. What was that like? What was the process like in general?
Yeah, that was actually back a year ago. I think it would have been almost a year ago. We had a conversation. There was a few people within the community, but me and Chris, Dr. Chris Wells, who works for McEwen as well, submitted an open letter to the city of Edmonton. I think it would have been in May, end of May, June. But we submitted a letter because at that time the city of Edmonton was doing in the process of this renaming that was happening, and we put forward a letter recommending that the names be Indigenous names and the reasons why. And so we were invited to speak, and we had a number of community folks who joined that conversation with City Council in June, and it was approved, and it was. And so it was approved that we can move forward in doing this. But I was also invited to sit as a co-chair on this committee and what this may look like. And again, this has never happened before. We've never done anything like this in the sense of within a city. I've chaired a number of committees and been on committees, but this was different. And so I reached out to some elders and just had some conversations about how do I do this appropriately. And teachings were shared with me in regards to within our communities and governance and the roles of women and men. And one of the things was that I put forward a recommendation that we have an all-female committee. And there was a reason to that. And it was shared by Leona Makokis to me in a conversation. As women, traditionally in our communities, we had we were the decision makers. So we were the decision makers, and we held that role because of our relationships and as mothers and being close to our children and close to the old ones in our communities. We knew the needs of our community. So we were given that role to make those decisions. And then we passed those over for the men to speak on our behalf. And so in ensuring that we were following protocol and ensuring that we were starting in ceremony and doing this in the right way, we went to ceremony with this, and then we built our committee of Indigenous women who came together, and we had 2 months. 2 months, like that wasn't. It was, and I remember thinking. And I remember asking an elder like in the middle of the city council meeting, and I was like, "Can we do this in 2 months?" And he's like, "If it's done right, and you follow protocol and you start in ceremony, yes, it can be done." And so we did that, and it was such a beautiful, amazing experience working with Indigenous knowledge keepers, elders, scholars, leaders. Community folks who were doing work within their communities. So there was a layer of knowledge that was coming into this committee from, and not just within, Edmonton specifically, but the connections to Edmonton. And so we had weekly meetings for roughly 2 months. There was a lot of different engagement. It was held virtually as well. We had ceremonies during this time. We had a tour of some of the spots in the wards that had specific historical stories to them. We had, and then at the end of the consultation, kind of the committee process, we gifted those names in ceremony to the city of Edmonton at the end of August. And those names, again, are the names that have been chosen and that have been approved by the city of Edmonton. And again, we wanted to ensure that, the committee was created from a group of diverse women, in the sense of diverse Indigenous women. So they were, it wasn't just say specifically women. There was women from different organizations or communities that would speak on their behalf of their community in this sense and provide us with knowledge and teachings. And throughout this as well, it wasn't just the committee that was speaking. We had a number of people that came into each of those meetings and did presentations on historical sites. And so it was I think the coolest project ever, because I don't think, and I said this in an interview after the names were approved, but I remember my daughter asking me, I remember we were driving home one day, and you know how you with me anyways, I asked my kid, questions, just odd questions sometimes, and I was like, do you know what mommy does? What does mommy do for work? And she was like, you make things free. And she meant that in a way that, and it was very simple. And I think that, not that I'm making, she understood that in the sense of, this project that I was doing and the impact, but ensuring that we as Indigenous people are visible, that my children would be able to see themselves represented in this city, and they can see themselves and be proud of who they are as Indigenous girls. And so it was really important. And of course, the work that I do with MacEwan, right, is focused on Indigenous initiatives. And so supporting Indigenous initiatives, curriculum, education, kind of everything over across campus has always been something I'm very passionate about. And my daughter, was very clear about that and said it in a sentence that was like, yeah, that is what I do, in a nutshell, is I make things Cree, or I make things Indigenous in a sense of my work.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Kids always manage to just say it in the most honest way, don't they?
They do, yeah.
I wonder, just in the little bit of time we have left, do you mind telling us the story behind one of the ward names? I know that you probably wouldn't have time to go through all of them, but is there a story you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, well, so one of the things that we're actually going to be doing a launch or a screening of the documentary that is created with the name. So that is being done towards the end of May. And so we will be sitting on a panel, but the documentary will be shown kind of the process, because we wanted to make sure that we documented this process, again, because it had never been done before. We wanted to ensure that it provided some insight to community and to others who may, take this journey within their areas. And so there is also videos of each of the wards, because I think it's important that with each of the wards there's meaning to each of them, and very important meaning to each of them. And so, not that I have a favorite, I think they all speak to just the importance of that area, or to that language, or to that history. And so I'm looking at the names now. I'm like, geez, which one would I, think is? And I think one of the one that always stands out for me is the Piensoin, which is the ward. Oh gosh, it is in the south. It's by the Twilliger Dog Park. And so I don't even know by the numbers anymore. I just go by the names, because that's kind of the way we were doing by the names. So I'm like, I don't even know what ward number that was. And this specific, this one was given in ceremony, and I think that's why it's special, and it's a Cree word. And it was done on a weekend where we had a gathering of the committee members, and we did the tours of the site, and this was one of the sites that we did tour, and we did a hike, and we were able to see and learn about the history of that land, and that traditionally there was old Sundance grounds there, and there was so much teachings around this, and then to go into ceremony that evening, and for this name to be shared. And what it means is it means the land of the Thunderbirds. And again, from an aerial view, which we didn't realize until after the name was given, that we went out and the map of, like, we had a large map up, and we started marking out each of the, because there's new boundaries as well. And so we started marking out the each of the wards with different colors, like on the map, just so we could see it and visualize it. And this ward was shaped like a thunderbird. And so, again, like, it speaks to the importance of our ceremonies, and where we seek knowledge as well, our sources of knowledge. Typically, as Indigenous people, our sources of knowledge is accessing our knowledge from our ancestors and ceremony. And so I think that's why I think this, if I had to have a favorite, this would be my favorite, because it was a gift. It was a gift to us.
Wow.
That is so beautiful. Like, sorry, I'm tearing up here just hearing that.
That is really, really amazing. And it's exciting to know that there is that documentary that's going to come out.
Yeah.
We'll have to keep a watch for that, and obviously we'll share it to our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is going to come out before then, but when the time comes, we'll make sure it's on our socials.
Yeah, I'll share about it on our Instagram and on our Facebook pages. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Thank you so much, Terri.
Thank you so much.
The time and for sharing your knowledge with us so that we can share it to our listeners. It really does mean a lot to us.
Yeah, it's been an honor to speak with you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and I appreciate the invite.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I know we're at the end of our time. Is there anything else you wanted to say in closing or touch off on?
No, I'm always, I know that you are both students, and I'm always supportive of these kind of work and these kind of projects that students are doing. And so keep up the good work and keep doing this really important work. And I hope that you have much success in your podcast. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And we wish you just so much success in everything you're doing and everything you continue to do. Your PhD studies, oh my God, that's terrifying, and I'm not even the one doing it. So I wish you nothing but good things on that.
Yeah, I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Awesome. Have a great day, Terri.
Have a great day. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye. Yeah.
That was a awesome interview. Terri is amazing.
She was so lovely.
Yeah, just a very, very lovely person.
Mm-hmm. It was such an incredible interview. She's so well spoken, and a lot of what she said was very impactful. And
yeah. I mean, obviously, this is just this is an interview that we got because we wanted our listeners to find out a little bit more about opportunities in Q and opportunities in Edmonton on the whole. So yeah, I think that really our role in this is to just put a lot of links in the episode description, and really just to give our listeners the opportunity to understand, there's information that doesn't strictly belong to us as the people who run this podcast. So I'm really grateful that someone like Terri is willing to come on and speak to us and gift us her time and her knowledge. It's so important, it's so significant, but it needs to come from somebody who has the access to that knowledge and has the access to that power and who is the keeper of that, right?
Yeah, and we as podcasters, we can absolutely provide a platform, but I don't think, we ourselves.
We recognize that we aren't the people who get to keep that knowledge. Yeah. So it's very, very nice that in the midst of all the initiatives that she's doing, she took time out of her day to speak with us. I'm really, really excited to hear about this documentary that's going to come out to do with the naming of the wards. Not just because I think there's going to be a lot of really good historical and the stories of history, as she phrased it, information to learn from the names of the wards here in Edmonton, but also to see the way that process was undertaken, because we're certainly at a point socially where we are, as Terri put it, understanding Indigenous presence in Canada beyond just the trauma, the genocides, the tragedies that have occurred. Certainly never forgetting that those did occur, and we've had to do a lot of reconciling to get to the point where our Canadian governments, our provincial governments, our local governments are acknowledging that those things happened. But to me, what I think she's saying is going to be in that documentary is, okay, now how do we start doing some of the repair work and the building back up? So I think it's awesome that they documented their process, because I think it is a historical process. They are doing history as scholarship when they start picking names and when they start looking at the past to gain names from.
I think it's also just going to be a great resource for people in the future to watch and to understand.
Yeah.
Eventually, that documentary will be a source on its own, because it's documenting something that has happened and that people spent so much time and work into creating something that I think is really, really beautiful that they've done.
Yeah. I think that creating the records of how we are re-engaging with a past that has been, like, pretty suppressed, like, for really lack of a better word, at least in my mind, is we have, we talk about decolonizing our curriculums, which she alluded to when she talked about how in her own work on campus, moving away from just being an Indigenous students-focused campus or an Indigenous students-focused presence on campus into working with faculty, into working with the wider community. I think that does do that decolonizing work, or at least what I am used to hearing is talking about decolonizing our curriculums and decolonizing our institutions. So yeah, very, very, very powerful. What else stood out for you, Victoria?
I think when she was telling us the story about her daughter and how she said, "You make things Cree," I think that was beautiful, but also that really just does describe the work she's doing and what they're doing over at MacEwan and in the broader community. They are bringing Indigenous stories and Indigenous issues to the forefront, and I think that is so important, especially right now, because we see so much pain out there, and I think it's important to tell the stories of not just the pain.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, colonization has global legacies and continues to have global legacies. So I think when Terri talks about recording what they're doing as they're doing it and leaving kind of this posterity for, this is how we did this really significant thing, or this is what we have been doing, this is what we want to continue doing. I think that is really important, because Indigenous issues are not local to Edmonton.
Yeah.
And like the renaming of our city council wards, which is our electoral districts, for anyone not listening in Edmonton who's trying to figure out what a ward is. Very, very, very interesting. Like, it's not something I would have thought of. Her talking a lot about knowledge, but also to provide a framework or a model for, this is how we reclaim that knowledge. I think that those sorts of tools make so much sense, that one of the challenges is creating methodology. So that's very, very interesting. I'm very grateful to have had that perspective and that knowledge shared with me when we did this interview.
Me too. When she mentioned on the podcast how they were recording at Blue Quills, when I listened to the first episode of their show, I was so fascinated, because they were talking about how they basically reclaimed that site.
Mm-hmm.
And because Blue Quills used to be a residential school, and now it's an Indigenous university where people thrive. It's a very fascinating episode, and I really suggest people check out the podcast, because I think it's so well done. Yeah, I can't really explain it myself, but it's so well done.
Yeah. And, like, it's really not for us to explain. Like, really what we are wanting to do is we want to, in this and through this interview, just give our listeners a push towards resources that we can't give, because that knowledge doesn't belong to us. So yeah, please check out in the episode description Terri's podcast, Two Crees in a Pod.
It's great. They have 4 seasons, lots of episodes. Just, they've done so much incredible work, and when I listened to it, I was like, this is one of my new favorite shows. Going to be listening all the time now.
I think that, if you're already listening to our show and you're really interested in the way that diverse perspectives work in with each other, I think when Terri talks about having all these different scholars, these different academics, but also elders, and such a range of people who have different information, but also different knowledge, I think that really speaks towards a holistic approach to the past, which is so evidently so needed.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I absolutely agree. I think it'll be great to see that on the screen in the documentary when it does come out.
Oh yeah, with the wards. Yeah,
to see that sort of interaction, because I think that would be really amazing to see, and hopefully people all can access it.
I think the things like that documentary, or even just the interviews and these kind of self-published sources, I think are so vital to the popular understanding of the past, because Terri talked a little bit about knowledge and about curriculums and about the way that things are taught. Our understanding of our society in any given moment is entirely produced from our conception of the past. If we don't believe that things happened, then we don't account for it in our understanding of the contemporary. And that has that has the real potential to perpetuate harm. And it has continued to perpetuate harm. So as we've said before, this episode is not about us. This episode is an opportunity for us to encourage our listeners to reach out, to grab some information from someone else, because it's not our information to give.
I think it's important for us to keep on educating ourselves beyond school. And
I suppose all there is to say is just that we are grateful that the work is being done at MacEwan that exposes us to these issues. However, we also, respectfully and humbly acknowledge that knowledge doesn't strictly belong to us. That knowledge needs to be held by those who are going to be risen up by it, and those who need to be empowered by it, and those who it belongs to. It is cultural knowledge that we have to respectfully say, I can learn it from you, but it's not my place to try to own it myself.
And I think another thing I think it's important to say is that there's a lot of work that we also need to do personally, and examine ourselves and try to look at the way we were educated and see where the issues lie and try to fill in that gap.
Yeah, absolutely. 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 And we invite you listeners to do the same. Please follow the resources that we are going to have below.
Please listen to Terri's podcast.
Please listen to Terri's podcast, Two Crees in a Pod. I love the name of their show so much.
Yeah, as soon as I saw it, I was just like, that is incredible.
It's really good.
Yeah, and it's really well done. Yeah. I highly recommend it. I really enjoyed listening to it.
So yeah, we will have all the information and social media for Two Crees in a Pod, for Terri, for the other stuff that we've discussed in this episode. We will also, on our own social media, post when the documentary on the renaming of the City Council wards comes out. So if you want to see that, follow us on all our social media that is down below.
Before we sign off, Sloan and I would like to acknowledge that MacEwan University, this podcast, and all the content we create are located and produced on Treaty 6 territory. This land has traditionally and continues to be a home, place of gathering, and meeting ground for many Indigenous peoples. This includes the Nakota Sioux, Niitsitapi, Métis, Saulteaux, and Cree First Nations.
For anyone who is wondering, Victoria and I are now going to tell you which wards we happen to be living in, because we are recording in our own homes. So I am living and recording today in Ward Maynardnick.
And I am recording today in Ward Nakota Iska. Yeah, that's a beautiful name, by the way.
Thank you so much for listening, everybody, and have a great day.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.